Pay close attention. The news you are about to see is fulfilling Bible prophecy.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you news as it relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yisrael Hawkins. Well, what's America's longest war been? We had the Korean War, we also had Vietnam, but we've got something even more recent than that. How did U.S. President Trump decide to act on the Iran deal? That's the question on a lot of people's minds. And who is Israel firing missiles at now? We have those things and more. But first, we're going to start off in Kenya, where a dam in a village has given way, leaving over 40 people dead in its wake. The dam burst during the night, a concern looming for other similar structures as heavy rains continue to cover the area. While many of the villagers search for the missing, a great majority of those victims are children. Pius Masai of the National Disaster Management Unit spoke to the press saying that they are looking for the families that are missing, hoping to trace the deaths.
Charles Kimono, a survivor, came to search for his sister and only after searching for a few hours found her body after the waters receded. Now, the main purpose of the dam was for the irrigation of a flower farm. The question on investigators' mind is what type of fortifications were used and are checking other dams in the area. Now, the rainfall in the area is the heaviest that has been in 2 decades, so of course that has added to the dam failing. And
another thing to note is that those were not just recently built dams. Those dams were probably about that old too, about 2 decades or so old. But as of note, more rainfall than they've had, in the last 2 decades. So of course they wouldn't be put under those stresses during those years previously. Well, since the flood started in March, the Kenyan Red Cross has called the situation a national disaster and said that in addition to all the lives lost, the number of homeless people because of the flooding has reached over 300,000.
Well, September 11th, 2001, America was attacked, and shortly after that, in 2002, the U.S. went to war in Afghanistan. Today, 16 years later, they are still there. Now, the U.S. State Department recently released a statement saying that they were cutting $255 million in security aid funding in Pakistan. Now, this is a consequence for Pakistan's ongoing support of the Taliban. And some were concerned that Pakistan would close vital entryways into Afghanistan for military personnel as a result. Defense Secretary Jim Mattis said there hasn't been any indication of anything like that.
Interesting. Well, the troops in Afghanistan have doubled to 16,000 since President Trump took office. With the administration's new strategy in place, the top U.S. commander said that he has more leeway to pursue the Taliban. As a result, they've released more firepower and they've dropped more munitions on the area since 2012. Currently, the Taliban controls more than half of Afghanistan.
Well, in Yemen, the civil war has been raging on for 3 years now, with Iran supporting one side and Saudi Arabia supporting the other. More than 10,000 have been killed, with over 2 million people displaced from their homes. And to top it all off, a cholera epidemic is ongoing. Now, Saudi Arabia has been backing Yemeni government soldiers as they fight against Houthi rebels who've forcefully taken large portions of land. So far, there doesn't look to be an end in sight, as a Saudi blockade is holding food and supplies from the people of Yemen and also contributing to a deadly cholera epidemic.
According to the UN, 8 million people are on the brink of famine. People in the area have been left both homeless and hungry. So this is an indication that both sides of the conflict know that food or a lack of food can be used as a weapon.
And it sure looks like they're using that weapon in this case.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, major U.S. ally relations are in jeopardy as they are concerned over President Trump's threat to pull out of the Iran nuclear deal. Russia is placing its influence behind France and Germany, adding to those opposing Trump's threat to withdraw from the Iran deal. Sergei Lavrov said that if the U.S. decides to pull out of the agreement, of course, the international community will lose one of its important instruments, allowing us to support the non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction.
Well, in Brussels, Federica Mogherini, the EU's High Representative and Chief Negotiator for the nuclear deal, when it was signed on 2015, spoke to PBS NewsHour in an interview where she was asked her thoughts on how the nuclear deal with Iran would hold up if the U.S. pulls out. Let's take a look at the following video.
Well, first of all, let me remind us all that the Atomic Agency, the IAEA, has certified 8 times that Iran is compliant with all the commitments included in the agreement. 8 times. Last time just a few weeks ago. We have the international community strongly behind the full implementation of the deal that has prevented Iran from developing a nuclear weapon. So the deal not only will hold, but the deal doesn't belong to one country or another. It's a UN Security Council resolution, and the entire international community, from Russia to China to Japan to Latin America to Europe and the European Union, will continue to guarantee that the deal will hold, is implemented, and that Iranians will continue to stick to their nuclear commitments.
So if he were to take this step to say that Iran is not in compliance, what would it mean for the European Union, for the other U.S. allies in Europe?
Well, the rest of the international community will continue to stick to the agreement, as we've done so far. Let me also say something that is very important, and I think that American people understand this perfectly well. We are living in a moment of tensions and growing risks on the nuclear side. We are living in a moment of tensions and growing risks on the nuclear side.
It's being reported here that President Trump is doing this because he believes this is going to give him more political leverage over other co-signers to renegotiate the deal. Do you agree that that it would create pressure on you and the others to renegotiate, that it could change the circumstances?
Now, this deal has been negotiated for 12 years and has put together major world powers and has been, as I said, unanimously voted by the UN Security Council. 12 years of negotiations, 102 pages of clear details on extremely complex nuclear-related aspects. It's not a deal you can easily open and renegotiate. There is no technical nor political space to renegotiate this deal. I can tell you something. Already in other cases, the United States decided to step out of an agreement. The rest of the world stick to it. I think of the Paris Climate Agreement, for instance. What will happen is not pressure to renegotiate an agreement that cannot be renegotiated and should not be renegotiated because it's working and it's proving to be working. What will happen will simply be that the United States will contravene a UN Security Council resolution, and the rest of the world will stick to it.
Well, given that, if President Trump does go ahead, declare that Iran is not in compliance, what will you and the other signatories do about it? What are your options?
I understand that whatever message the president will pass, it will be then up to Congress to take its own decisions. But I would like to underline one thing that is important. This is not a treaty or an agreement that the United States and Iran stipulated among themselves. We're talking again here of a UN Security Council resolution that is and will remain valid, whatever decision the United States will take.
Ms. Mogherini, more broadly, there have been some disturbing critiques of President Trump made recently by the chairman of our Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Bob Corker. Among other things, he said the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, and the White House Chief of Staff are, quote, all that's separating us from chaos. He also said that President Trump is making reckless threats toward other countries that could set the nation, quote, on the path to World War III. I want to ask you, as the leader of the European Union, how do you view President Trump's actions with regard to world affairs since he's taken office?
It is true that with the United States we have a long-standing friendship, a strong partnership, many things we continue to do together, but also some points of difference when it comes to some of the foreign policy or security policy approaches that this administration, or President Trump rather, personally is taking. And I would like to stress this once again. We are living dangerous times in the world. We are living dangerous times in the world. We are living dangerous times in the world. For once that we have an agreement that is functioning, that is working, that is delivering, the worst thing you can do is trying to dismantle it. Also because you would show the way to others that making deals actually is not worth it. Because the message that America would send to the rest of the world is that America cannot be trusted upon, because a deal that America voted for just 2 years ago in the UN Security Council with a resolution unanimously adopted, a deal that America helped to shape enormously, would be rejected by the same country if we pass the message that every change of administration in Washington or elsewhere, deals are thrown away and renegotiated. No one would negotiate with any administration ever, and any deal would be exposed to be renegotiated every term. This is not a way of making deals, not in foreign policy, not in private businesses, and I think President Trump understands that perfectly well.
Well, Katan, it seems as if she's not too worried about whether the U.S. pulls out or not, because in her, as she explained there, it seems like it's going to stand regardless.
Yeah, they're going to press forward.
Well, the leader of Iran's Islamic Revolution, Ayatollah Khomeini, condemned the U.S. president for threatening the Iranian nation and called his speech where he announced the U.S. departure from the Iranian nuclear deal as stupid and cheap, saying that Trump told more than 10 lies about Iran. He also said that a U.S. president is in no position to menace Iran, and the country is standing strong.
The Ayatollah added that the U.S. is hostile toward Iran because the 1979 revolution cut off its hand, referring to the United States' hand, from the country. And lastly, he said the U.S. enmity will not stop even if Iran gives into its demands regarding its missile program and presence in the region.
Well, providing a few more details on relations with Iran, as well as several other key matters related to the Middle East, we turn over now to our chief correspondent, Larry McGee. Larry?
Along with other issues making headlines as well is the conflict between the U.S. and its European allies over sanctions against Iran. In 2017, America is reported to have traded with Iran to the tune of $201 million. By comparison, however, European trade with Iran was estimated at $25 billion. American sanctions against Iran hit its allies harder in the pockets than it does itself, and this, in large part, is why Europe has such strong objections. Secondary sanctions, where America imposes consequences and issues threats against companies, even if they are not American, who would buy and sell with nations that the U.S. has deemed unacceptable, is also provoking anger. The action is made possible by the petrodollar, which is a large part of the economic system of many nations, and also makes them vulnerable to U.S. manipulations and demands. President Trump has decided to shed the demands outlined in the Iranian deal this week. Speaking on behalf of the move, newly installed National Security Advisor John Bolton answered as to what the plan is for the administration now. The advisor says America's Plan B is already in action, which is to reinstitute strict sanctions against Iran with the intent to produce a negative impact on its economy. It is hoped that the effects will be so crippling that the former world power will have no choice but to give up its nuclear enrichment and missile programs and cease offering support to any nation not on board with the American agenda. One of the 7 nations situated in the crosshairs of that agenda is Syria, who has recently released footage of a missile attack which they say was carried out by one of America's foremost allies in the Middle East, Israel. Have a look. Israel is acknowledging that they did in fact wage the attack, which they are saying is payback for an attack on their troops. The strike was leveled against Iranian property in Syria. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says that Tehran crossed a red line when they allegedly launched a missile attack of their own against Israeli forces in the Golan Heights. Israel has threatened further that any other acts of aggression will be met with overwhelming force. Violence is increasing now as Palestinians who have been holding protests in Gaza over the last 6 weeks fight against Israeli soldiers with rocks, sticks, and fire. Palestinians are attempting to tear down the barbed wire fence that separates Israel from Gaza, while Israeli forces shoot tear gas and some live ammunition. More than 40 protesters are reported to have been killed so far, with scores more having been wounded. On Israel's side of the fence, security is on high alert in anticipation of a response from Hamas. Tanks are on the front line, and technologies such as drones are also being employed, with other military assets waiting in the wings. But analysts say Israel is hesitant to use its full force because that move might provide imagery that would assist Hamas in winning the propaganda angle of the war. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. It's on, Jeff. Back to you.
Well, as Larry said in his report, tensions are rising between the nations of Israel and Syria. And of course, recently there have been 2 separate airstrikes on Syria by the Israeli government. Now, Tel Aviv says in retaliation for some 20 rockets launched into the Golan Heights by the Iranian military stationed in Syria.
But Israel's counterattack was unlike anything they've done in Syria so far. Israeli fighter jets fired about 60 rockets, and another 10 missiles were fired from the ground in this last strike. The Israeli military says it hit over 50 Iranian targets within Syria, including intelligence sites, military bases, and munitions facilities.
Syrian officials say sources say 3 people were killed. However, an actual number has not been confirmed yet. The first Israeli airstrike was launched immediately after Donald Trump announced his decision to withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal. As a result, 15 people were killed, including 8 Iranians just south of Damascus.
In his most recent statement concerning Iran, the American president said, "We'll see how we do with Iran. Probably we won't do very well with them, but it's okay too. They've got to understand life," because I don't think they do understand life. If you look at what's happening in the Middle East with Syria, with Yemen, with all of the places they're involved, it's bedlam and death.
Bedlam, interesting. Of course, Jeff, that bedlam is an old term for chaos, mayhem, and confusion, and was used to refer to one of London's most notorious insane asylums.
Definitely not giving him a compliment.
No, not by any means. So President Trump is in fact blaming Iran for the devastation taking place in the Middle East right now. It seems to be a bit of a double standard.
That's right, Katan, because as we have reported many times, the U.S. backed the Saudi bombing campaign in Yemen, which created the world's worst man-made humanitarian crisis. And if you recall, the U.S. also furnished Saudi Arabia with weapons, logistic support, and intelligence. And in Syria, the U.S. is accused of sending money and weapons to jihadist armed groups seeking regime change. So there definitely, the U.S. has quite a hand in that area and the confusion that President Trump was talking about.
Yeah, that's the pot calling the kettle black, I tell you. Well, President Trump has given Iran a list of demands, including one very notable one that Tehran must drop their, quote, quest to destroy Israel. So the White House's support for Israel is evident in this move, but how does Iran feel about Trump's decision to back out of the deal and start making demands of the Middle Eastern country?
Well, as you can imagine, not too great. Take a look at this video. As you see there, the demonstrators were actually chanting "Down with America," and while the American flag those Iranian lawmakers were burning was made of paper, their feelings on the matter are very real.
That's right. So getting back to Syria and the plumes of smoke rising from a Damascus neighborhood, there has been a shadow war going on in Syria between Israel and Iran for quite a while. However, it may be the first time the Iranian military has directly targeted Israel instead of using Hezbollah or Hamas to do so. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Iran crossed a red line and insists the Israeli response was appropriate.
Now, Israeli forces in the northern part of the country are on high alert, waiting for Iran to retaliate. However, neither side seems to want this all-out war. What started as a shadow war is definitely out in the open now, and it's part of a pattern of violence that's trending sharply up.
President Trump commented on the situation, saying since the agreement, Iran's bloody ambitions have grown only more brazen, and it appears Iran and its proxies are surrounding Israel, with Hezbollah pretty much running southern Lebanon, Hamas, of course, in control of the Gaza Strip, and now Iran heavily armed in Syria, all of these regions lying along Israel's borders.
But Israel has not just been on the defensive, it has been on the offensive for quite some time. Now, last August, an Israeli general admitted his Air Force had carried out almost 100 strikes in Syria over the past 5 years. And those are the stories that you just don't hear about till after the fact. But, 100 strikes there in Syria by Israel, that's quite a few.
It sure is. Wow. So where does Russia stand in all of this? Russia backs both Iran and Assad to support its interest in Syria, while behind Israel, the U.S. has helped out or put pressure on Tehran. So more than likely, Israel and Iran will clash again at some point. And it seems in that same way, that also still kind of, I guess they call it by proxy, pits the United States again against Russia, because there's been a lot of tensions between the United States and its allies and Russia in regards to the events taking place in Syria as well.
Right, and as you mentioned there, Katan, it looks like all the key players are drawing or taking sides. No one really is remaining in a neutral place. They're either, for or against, and it looks like the battle lines are being established. And, as we can see here, that the nations, they're not really looking for solutions. There's a lot of finger pointing, there's a lot of blaming, but there is someone that is offering them a solution, and that's Yisrael Hawkins from the House of Yahweh, and he's been writing about this in his monthly newsletters and prophetic word magazines. And if you'd like to read more about them and the answers to these problems today, contact the House of Yahweh, and when you do, don't forget to request that free monthly newsletter and prophetic word magazine.
Here's how. To contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494, or you can visit them on any of their websites by going to Yahweh.com, YisraelHawkins.com, or Yahweh'sBranch.com. You can also visit our website by going to YPNnews.com, and of course, you can email them by typing in info@Yahweh.com. And all calls outside the United States, please dial the number on your screen. And of course, don't forget the best resource to studying the Holy Scriptures, the Yisrael Says and the Ask Yisrael programs. You can find those simply by going online and typing in YisraelSays.com and AskYisrael.com.
Well, don't go anywhere. Up next is another enlightening message from Yisrael Hawkins. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
And I'm Katan Alexander.
Thanks for watching.